Mr. President, some things never change in the United States Senate. For more than 200 years, our practice of extended debate has been the single most defining characteristic of the Senate. And for more than 200 years, extended debate has annoyed the majority and empowered the minority, whoever is in the majority or minority. What has changed, however, is that the majority today threatens not only to change Senate rules and practice in order to cripple this tradition and consolidate power, but to use unprecedented tactics to do it. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to come together and preserve the fundamental integrity of this body, even if we may disagree about some of the political issues. I want to explain to my colleagues why neither the ends nor the means that the majority has been discussing are legitimate. First, there is no debate crisis here on the Senate floor, none whatsoever. In fact, it is easier to end debate today than during most of American history. For more than a century since we had no cloture rule at all, ending debate required unanimous consent. A single senator could filibuster merely by objecting, and from 1917 to 1975, ending debate required a supermajority of 2/3, higher than the 3/5 required today. As I said a minute ago, extended debate has always annoyed the majority. Today is no different. And yet we hear the majority claiming that there have been hundreds of filibusters, that the rules are being abused, that obstruction is at an all-time high. Well, the American people likely do not know the particulars of our debate rules and practices, but senators making such claims certainly should. The majority pumps up the filibuster numbers by maintaining and claiming that every cloture motion is evidence of a filibuster. They know that is not true. The Congressional Research Service says that, quote, the Senate leadership had increasingly utilized cloture as a routine tool to manage the flow of business, even in the absence of any apparent filibuster. In many instances, cloture motions may be filed not to overcome filibusters in progress, but to preempt ones that are only anticipated, unquote. And that is what is going on today. The majority leader often files a cloture motion as soon as a motion or a bill becomes pending. He does that to prevent debate from starting, not to end debate that is underway. In the last 3 Congresses under this majority, a much higher percentage of cloture motions get withdrawn without any cloture vote at all than under the last 3 Congresses under a Republican majority. The last 3 Congresses. The majority leader appears to think that debate itself is simply dilatory. While extended debate has long been annoying to the majority, whichever party is in the majority, this majority leader apparently believes that any debate is annoying. Neither filing a cloture motion nor taking a cloture vote is evidence of a filibuster. A filibuster occurs when an attempt to end debate, such as a cloture vote, fails. That is why some on the other side of the aisle want to address what they claim is a filibuster problem by changing the cloture rule. Let's use some common sense and stop misleading our fellow citizens about how this body operates. A filibuster is a debate that cannot be stopped. And guess what? During this 112th Congress, a much smaller percentage of cloture votes have failed than in the past. That's right. Cloture votes today are more successful in preventing filibusters than in the past. And the same is true about motions to proceed, which is the particular focus of those who are now threatening to weaken debate by forcing a rules change by a mere majority vote, or what is called I'll put that in later. In the 112th Congress, 32% of cloture votes on motions to proceed have failed, compared to an average of 54% during the previous dozen Congresses. Put simply, the current Senate majority has used cloture to prevent filibusters on motions to proceed more effectively than in the past. And by the way, during the last several Congresses, when the Democrats were in the minority, the current majority leader and majority whip voted to filibuster motions to proceed dozens of times. Like I said, extended debate has always annoyed the majority and empowered the minority. And like I said, it is easier to end debate today than during most of American history. Once again, the majority has done so more effectively in the current Congress than in the past, both in general and on motions to proceed. There simply is no crisis, no unprecedented abuse that requires some sort of fundamental change in the rules and traditions of this body. Rather than blowing up the Senate, I suggest that the majority actually try working with the minority. That's something we haven't seen under the current majority leader's tenure. Since the Democrats took control of the Senate in 2007, the majority leader has not only routinely filed cloture motions to prevent debate, but he has severely limited the minority's ability to offer amendments. Since the majority leader is at the front of the line in this body, he uses that preference to offer amendments so that the minority cannot. And that has just been used here a few minutes ago. The current majority leader has used this tactic more than 60 times, more than any previous majority leader of either party. In fact, he has done so more than all previous majority leaders combined. It is one thing to require a majority to pass an amendment, but the effect, or rather the intent, of this tactic is to require senators in the minority to obtain the majority leader's permission to even offer amendments in the first place. And they call this the greatest deliberative body in the world? Now, isn't that ironic? The majority leader uses the rules to his legislative advantage, but wants to strip from the minority the ability to do the same. The Senate is not supposed to work that way, and did not when Democrats were in the minority. Back in April 2005, when he was the minority whip, when he was in the minority, our distinguished current majority leader defended the minority's ability to offer even non-germane amendments, because doing so prompted Senate consideration of subjects that the majority may have ignored. Well, as I say, that was then, this is now. Today, it doesn't require 3/5 to block an amendment. The majority leader can and has done the same thing all by himself. This kind of silencing of the minority views does not even happen in the House of Representatives, which operates by majority rule across the board. In the House, the majority party, either Republican or Democrat, often limits amendments, sometimes barring them entirely. But at times, the minority is entitled before final passage to a motion to recommit, which means a chance to propose a different version of the bill. Wouldn't it be pathetic if we used that procedure only in the Senate? This motion is not merely symbolic. Not infrequently, that motion carries. In contrast, when the Senate Majority Leader fills the amendment tree, as he just did, he precludes anything like the House's motion to recommit. When the minority's rights are trampled like this, what is it to do? Acquiesce or respond in self-defense? Frankly, it should be no surprise if a minority blocked from influencing legislation through amendments would demand extended debate by opposing cloture. But look what happens. The majority obstructs the minority's right to participate in the development of legislation, and then attacks the minority for opposing the passage of that legislation. Again, that is not the way the Senate is supposed to operate. Mr. President, it is not just the minority who suffers from this strategy. More to the point, the American people suffer. They sent us here to be real senators, individuals who represent them and their concerns. They expect us actually to legislate, which means to amend as well as debate legislation, not simply to vote on whatever the majority puts in front of us. Our constituents want us to force attention to public issues, even when the majority would prefer to avoid them. This is the caliber of representation our constituents both demand and deserve, and the rules and practices of the Senate have been designed to facilitate just this kind of representation. It is these same rules that the majority now seeks to change because they find them inconvenient. There is a conceit expressed in Washington that what happens in Congress is beyond the comprehension of interest of most Americans. But that is not so. When our voice is stifled, full representation for our constituents is denied. When we are gagged, the people are gagged. Nothing can be easier to grasp or provoke greater public indignation. So my first point is that debate is not the problem. If there is a crisis, it is the majority's gambit of preventing amendments and then filing hundreds of cloture motions to prevent debate. My second point is that the unprecedented tactic threatened by the majority to limit debate even more will only further undermine the integrity of this body. Some of those pushing in that direction have never served in the minority, but all senators should be alarmed by this prospect. The majority has talked about changing Senate rules to eliminate the opportunity to filibuster motions to proceed. This opportunity has been available to senators since at least 1949, and as I've mentioned, the majority leader himself repeatedly seized that opportunity when he was in the minority. I do not believe the cloture rules need to be changed. I do believe, however, that if the Senate is to consider a change, it should follow the process laid out in our rules. That process exists for a reason. It is the process we've used to change rules in the past, and there's no reason other than a raw power grab to do it any other way. Senate rules specify that ending debate on a rules change needs approval by 2/3 of senators present and voting, and there is a very good reason this is so. This cloture hurdle on rules changes exists to ensure that such amendments are not made without bipartisan cooperation. If anything should require broad consensus, it should be the rules by which this institution itself operates. That is how, for example, we changed rules in 2007 concerning the content of conference reports and the use of earmarks, or how we established a way to provide for public disclosure of holds. All these changes, some of which required amending the rules, occurred during the tenure of the present majority leader. None was muscled through by majority fiat or forced on an unwilling minority. Bipartisanship was possible because these changes were good for the Senate. But now we learn that the majority may begin the next Congress by disregarding our rules and attempting to change those they find inconvenient by a simple partisan majority. They threaten, as they did before the start of the current Congress, to use the so-called nuclear option to force new rules by single-party will. The substantive changes they propose would be degrading enough to the Senate. The method they propose to impose them would be catastrophic. I urge my colleagues, from freshmen to the most senior members, to take some guidance from our predecessors. Senator Mike Mansfield had served in the minority and later became majority leader. In 1975, when senators similarly proposed using this same nuclear option, similarly to change the cloture rule by simple majority, he said that this tactic would, quote, destroy the very uniqueness of this body and diminish the Senate as an institution of this government, unquote. It would, he said, quote, alter the concept of the Senate so drastically that I cannot under any circumstances find any justification for it, unquote. Senator Reid expressed a similar view in 2003 when he was the minority whip, arguing that rules changes should be considered through regular order through the process that our rules provide. Senator Reid reaffirmed that view in 2005 when he was the minority leader, saying that the so-called nuclear option would amount to breaking the rules to change the rules. Senator Reid further observed, quote, one of the good things about this institution we have found is that the filibuster, which has been in existence since the beginning, from the days of George Washington, we have changed the rules as it relates to it a little bit, but never by breaking the rules, unquote. In other words, if the majority wants to grab even more power, if blocking amendments is not enough for them, if debate is too annoying for them, if they want to rig the rules to further sideline the minority, then they should use the process we have here in the Senate in place. They should make their case and present their arguments, and if they are compelling enough to attract a wide consensus, then the rules of this body can be changed. That is the way we have changed rules in the past. Senator Reid expressed this view when he was in the minority. Former Senator Chris Dodd, a good friend to many of us still in this chamber, and someone who I'd surmise would be sympathetic to the current majority's views on policy, did so while in the majority. He stated in his farewell address his opposition to changing the Senate rules in the way the majority leader proposes, or presently proposes. My friend Senator Dodd had this to say, quote, "I have heard some people suggest that the Senate as we know it simply can't function in such a highly charged political environment, that we should change the Senate rules to make it more efficient, more responsive to the public mood, more like the House of Representatives. I appreciate the frustration many have with the slow pace of the legislative process. Thus, I can understand the temptation to change the rules that make the Senate so unique and simultaneously so frustrating," unquote. But Senator Dodd continued, quote, "Whether such a temptation is motivated by a noble desire to speed up the legislative process or by pure political expedience, I believe such changes would be unwise," unquote. In conclusion, Senator Dodd said, quote, "We 100 senators are but temporary stewards of a unique American institution founded upon universal principles. The Senate was designed to be different, not simply for the sake of variety, but because the framers believed that the Senate could and should be the venue in which statesmen would lift America up to meet its unique challenges," unquote. Those who know both Senator Dodd and me know that we didn't agree on much during our years together in the Senate. However, on this point, I have to say that Senator Dodd couldn't have been more right. And we did agree on a number of things, but it took bipartisan agreement to be able to accomplish them. Rules changes like the ones proposed by the majority would alter the very nature of the Senate and undermine its unique purpose. For more than 2 centuries, the procedural rights of individual senators, both in the majority and in the minority, have been a hallmark of this body. Those rights and the rules and practices developed to protect them have earned us the reputation as the world's greatest deliberative body. Among those rights are minorities' right to offer amendments and to debate. The majority has already put the former under attack, and now the majority leader threatens to undermine the latter. Quite simply, the majority would weaken this institution in a partisan quest for power. Do these steps serve the Constitution? Do they maintain checks and balances? Do they foster bipartisanship? Do they benefit the American people? The answer to all of these questions is resoundingly negative. I urge my good friend, the majority leader, and my friends and colleagues on the other side to exercise serious self-restraint over whether and how Senate rules changes proceed. Those who are unhappy with the rules are free to propose amendments. As we've done in the past, those proposals should be referred to the Rules Committee and considered in a regular course of business. If the proposals have merit, support for them will cross party lines. Bipartisan solutions are urgently needed to resolve the nation's problems. I speak as a senator with a long record of working with Democrats to achieve bipartisan consensus and answers. But invoking the nuclear option will unnecessarily start the new Congress on a divisive and discordant tone. It will generate a poisonous climate guaranteed to impair our capacity to cooperate. No majority can expect the minority to stand on the sidelines while its rights are destroyed and its place in this body is diminished. Any minority of either party would defend its place and defend the integrity of this body. We will do so now if the majority pursues this reckless and entirely unnecessary course. Mr. President, I urge the majority to respect the traditions of the Senate and to follow our rules. I urge the majority to avoid rather than generate this crisis. And I have to say, we do not want to be like the House. This is a place where legislation has to be cooled, according to Jefferson. This is a place where we have to do more reflection. This is a place where there are rights in the minority that are time-honored rights for good reasons. Yes, we don't always get our will or our way here. That's tough for some of us sometimes. But on the other hand, rather than throw these rules out or to modify them in ways that really diminish them, and to use a nuclear option, which means overruling the ruling of the chair, of the parliamentarian, it's less than honorable, in my opinion. I know I considered years ago that this might be what we have to do in order to protect judgeship nominations from politics or from filibusters. But I was wrong, and we concluded that that was wrong. And we finally solved the problem with the so-called Gang of 14. But the fact of the matter is that I've gone through a lot of this, and I've got to say, there's a reason why these rules are in existence. And you don't just throw them out the door for political advantage. The fact is that this body was never intended to be one where you could just sluice things through any way you want to, and that the majority can get its will no matter what happens. This is a body where literally we have to deliberate. This is a body where we need to bring about bipartisan consensus. Now, that's hard sometimes. It's painful sometimes. It's irritating as can be sometimes. But it's the right thing to do. I really don't believe that the majority leader is going to push this. I think he's a better man than that. And I don't believe that the most senators in the majority would put up with that, because they're better men and women than that. And I have to say, on our side, we would like to see full debate. We get a little tired of the majority leader calling up a bill, filing cloture immediately, and then tying up the parliamentary tree so no debate, no amendments can be brought up unless he approves them. That's not the United States Senate's way. I'm not saying you can never tie up the tree, the parliamentary tree, but that should only be used at the end of the debate when it's gone on too long and it has to be brought to a close. It should not be used at the beginning of the debate. This is a body where we allow non-germane amendments. It's a body where we have rights. It's what makes it the greatest deliberative body in the world. It's a body where rules make a difference. And even though they're to our disadvantage now, I will argue exactly the same if anybody on our side, when we get in the majority, decides to change these rules this way. So I hope we all think it through, because there'd be all-out war from this day on, from the day on that we use a nuclear option to change the most pivotal, important, maybe the most important rule in the Senate. There are others that are very, very important. I don't mean to diminish them, but the filibuster rule is a time-honored right by the minority. It's one of the only protections the minority has, or should I say one of the few protections that the minority has, and it should not be thrown away frivolously. And I say to my colleagues on the other side, you may not believe it, but someday you're going to be in the minority. And you don't want to see these rules thrown out any more than we do. And if we ignore this, Katie, bar the door. We will have obstructed and hurt the greatest deliberative body in the world, and the system which has allowed it to be the greatest deliberative body in the world. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.